Welcome to this TechEd session on establishing identity lifecycle management for SAP S/4HANA Cloud. My name is Christian Kors. I'm an area product owner in the security control plane of SAP Business Technology Platform and responsible for authorizations. With me today is my colleague Gero Meder. Gero, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, also from my side as well. My name is Gero Meder and I work as a development manager for SAP Cloud Identity Access Governance. In today's session, I will explain you the recent features we have added to that product over the last couple of months. Back to you, Christian.
Thank you, Gero. As Gero already mentioned, he will be talking about compliance in the context of SAP Cloud Identity Access Governance, but we will start with an introduction and overview of the overall portfolio of SAP products and solutions when it comes to identity access management, identity access governance, identity lifecycle management, secure authentication, and so on. My focus in this part will be on identity and access management, and in particular on the SAP Cloud Identity Services. Then Gero will take over, and in the end, we'll jointly give a summary and provide some links for further information. So let's start by looking at SAP's portfolio and what we have to offer there from a perspective of identity access management, governance, and compliance. This overall space can be split into three major topic areas. First of all, we are setting the stage. This means that we are preparing the landscape with respect to access management, with respect to user accounts and access assignments, so that end users are able to interact with SAP's business applications in the right way. This means that we need to be able to provision those user accounts from some central system, some central source of truth, such as an HR system or a directory, into the business applications. And this is done by an identity lifecycle management solution. In our case, we have two that we offer. For the on-premise world, it's SAP Identity Management, and in the cloud, it's the Identity Provisioning Service. Of course, when you create user accounts and assign access, it's also important to ensure that you're not introducing risks for your company, because access that is excessive might also be used for bad things. And that's something that we prevent by offering the solutions for access governance. In the on-premise world, the product is SAP Access Control, and on the cloud side, it's SAP Cloud Identity Access Governance. Once these solutions are in place, the stage can be set, meaning the users have all the access and the accounts that they need in the landscape to run a business process that might span numerous business applications. However, when it comes to the runtime, of course, users need to authenticate before they are able to access the systems and benefit from the accounts that were created there during the first phase. And for secure authentication and single sign-on, what we offer are the products SAP Single Sign-On in the on-premise world and the Identity Authentication Service in the cloud. This is also the area where compliance, security, governance meets productivity, because as you can imagine, it makes the life of end users much easier and leads to much less friction in the work and with business processes if you have single sign-on in place and customers and end users don't perceive the differences between business applications simply because of lock-on screens. So how do our services fit into the overall picture of the business technology platform and the intelligent enterprise? As mentioned, those services are running on top of the business technology platform. And what they do is that they help ensure that a business process that consists of numerous business applications really feels seamless, both from administration and from end user perspective. On the administration side, thanks to our services, it's now possible to configure access along a business process without looking into the different business applications, but rather to follow the requirements and the personas that are defined on the business process level. And then the provisioning of this information into the individual business applications is done automatically. This also helps increase the user happiness with those applications, because they don't have to go looking for additional access because the process steps somehow don't work for them. On the other hand side, of course, end users also don't want to have the friction of numerous authentication pages. And that's something that we do with the Identity Authentication Service. Also here, helping make sure that a business process really feels seamless and frictionless end to end, even though it may consist of numerous business applications. As I mentioned, The identity authentication service is the solution that supports single sign-on, that supports secure authentication, and that's also where a business process usually starts for end users. And that's why I would like to look into this and how you can use this in your landscape. Identity authentication service supports two different modes that it can be integrated with in your landscape. The first one is the proxy mode. And this means that you are basically continuing to rely on your existing identity provider. So from end user perspective, there is no change. The user experience remains exactly as it was before because identity authentication service is used in proxy mode. So it relies on the authentication capabilities of the existing identity provider, but it helps connect this identity provider to the SAP business applications. This makes the introduction of our business applications much easier because you have then one central configuration point where all the business applications are integrated into the authentication service. And this is then in a point-to-point connection connected to your existing identity provider. In addition, you can also enhance the authentication tokens, which may be necessary for some business applications without having to change the configuration of your existing identity provider, because the identity authentication service can take over on the fly and add this information when necessary. Of course, to experience the full power of the identity authentication service, you need to run it in the second mode, where it's running as the standalone identity provider and takes over everything, including the authentication steps. There we offer numerous capabilities, such as, for example, two-factor authentication, risk-based authentication, and so on. We also have functionality for user management, including self-services for user registration or for a password reset, and so on. And once again, we have a very tight integration with the business applications, which in most cases also is shipped in a pre-configured way, so that business applications automatically allow users to authenticate on the identity authentication service for accessing the business application. I mentioned earlier that the integration with an existing identity and access management infrastructure can be done with a proxy mode, where you connect to an existing corporate identity provider. You can also use an existing corporate directory of users. This means that the usernames and passwords are stored, for example, in your on-premise Active Directory. And then the authentication service will pick those up during the authentication step and check if they are correct, and then allow people to authenticate. However, there are also other kinds of factors that you can use for authentication, such as an X509 certificate or a Kerberos/SPNego token that would come from your Active Directory. But we also support two-factor authentication and have for quite some time. So there are those time-based one-time passwords that you can create with an authenticator app, such as Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, also SAP Authenticator. There's an integration with solutions that support the Radius protocol, for example, from RSA. You can even send your one-time passwords through an SMS to a mobile phone, and then those are entered as the second factor during the authentication. What we added recently is the support for web authentication. Web authentication is a protocol that was introduced recently. It's driven by the FIDO project, and it's also a W3C standard now. What web authentication does, it allows you to use in a web-based application, so from inside a browser, security technologies that support the FIDO standard, such as, for example, Windows Hello, or security keys such as the YubiKey. With these, end users can protect the authentication in a much better way and in a very convenient way as well. And how to do it is something that you can see on the right side here. So in the upper right corner, you see the configuration page on the profile of the identity authentication service. So every end user can go there and register now devices for two-factor authentication that support the FIDO standard. What you see on the image there on the screen is that for my profile, I've configured the fingerprint scanner of my laptop. And I've also configured a security key, namely the YubiKey from Yubico. And I can then choose which one to use as a second factor during authentication. Of course, administrators also have the option to manage this. So they could also decide that only certain factors, certain technologies are allowed here, depending on what kind of policies are in place at your company. On the lower right, you'll see another screenshot. Now, this is the Windows security dialog that will then pop up when in the browser you're authenticating in the identity authentication service. So for example, after entering username and password, it asks for the second factor. And here I can now choose which one I want to have. I can either use my fingerprint, or I can enter the Windows PIN, or I can use the security key from Yubico. This actually leads to yet another factor, because that security key requires a PIN to become active. So I need to enter a PIN, then the YubiKey becomes active, and then I'm able to put my finger on the device and thereby activate the authentication. And that's something where I would like also to show a demo here. The demo consists of exactly those two parts. So first of all, you'll be seeing authentication based on username and password, and then using the fingerprint of my scanner of my laptop. And in the second part of the demo, you'll see again username and password as the first factor. And then I'll be using the security key, where I have to enter the PIN of the security key to unlock it. Then I put my finger on the key, and with that, then the authentication is successful. In the demo, the application that we're protecting is not a business application. It's the Identity Authentication Service Administration Console, which of course also makes sense to be protected with two-factor authentication. But from authentication process perspective, any other application, any business application could be protected with exactly the same steps. And with that, I'd like to show you the demo. So let's take a look how this is in real life. In the first part of the demo, I'll be using username and password for the first factor of the authentication, and then a fingerprint for the second factor. On the lower right, you'll see my laptop with a fingerprint scanner, and you'll see that Identity Authentication Service will ask me to put my finger on that scanner as soon as I've successfully entered username and password. And once I've put my finger on the scanner, I'm authenticated completely, and I have access to the administration console of the Identity Authentication Service. However, this is also possible with an external security key, such as the YubiKey that you can see on the lower right. Once again, I'm using username and password as the first factor for the authentication, and then the system will ask me to use the YubiKey as the second factor. There is a bit of a difference to the fingerprint scanner, because for the security key, the YubiKey, I first need to unlock it by entering a PIN. That's an additional layer of security. So once I've entered here the security key PIN, the security key becomes active. You will see it blinking in a second down there, which means now I need to put my finger on the button. And once I do that, Identity Authentication Service is notified and allows me to authenticate successfully to the administration console. Okay, so what have you seen in the demo? Identity Authentication Service is now able to integrate also FIDO-based devices into the authentication process. So this means that the two-factor authentication capabilities that we offer can also include, for example, a fingerprint scanner or a security key such as the YubiKey. And with these capabilities in place, it's much more flexible and much more powerful when it comes to the validation of a user's identity at runtime. However, as I mentioned before, identifying the user is not enough to allow them to work with a business process and the applications underneath the business process. You also need to make sure that users have the right accounts and that those accounts have the right access assignments in place before people are able to really do any meaningful within the business application. And that's something that we are doing with the Identity Provisioning Service. Identity Provisioning Service is also part of the SAP Cloud Identity Services, and its main purpose is to keep the landscape in sync when it comes to accounts and access. So what usually happens is that you have a central source of truth for this in your landscape, for example, an HR system or a directory. An Identity Provisioning Service will pick up information from this central source, such as, for example, new employees that were added to the HR system, or changes of attributes in the directory. And then based on certain rules, we'll create corresponding accounts and assign corresponding access in the business applications, depending, for example, on the department that the user belongs to or the role that the user is supposed to have within the organization. This is something that we already have in place, and it's used in many scenarios. But one of the things that customers were asking about is the performance, because as you can imagine, if you onboard a business application like S/4HANA Cloud, in many cases you will have to create a very large number of user accounts in this application, and you will also have to do a very large number of access assignments there, simply because so many people will be using this application. And that can be quite time consuming. And that's why we were looking for ways to speed up this process and to make it sure that customers can benefit quickly from business applications without having to wait for a lengthy provisioning process. And the way that we are doing this is by supporting now the bulk mode. Bulk mode means that we are not creating accounts and assigning access one operation at a time, but rather that these operations can be combined into packages, and then the target application processes this whole package in one step without going back and forth with the identity provisioning service. You can enable the bulk mode, as you can see here on the lower part of the screen, by setting first the flag that for a specific system connection in IPS, bulk mode shall be enabled. And then you can also specify how many operations shall be part of the package that's then sent in bulk mode to that business application for processing. We support already a number of applications here for this bulk mode when you write to it. So S/4HANA is supported in the on-premise and also in the cloud version. We have the marketing cloud that's being supported, the ABAP environment on the business technology platform, and also the integrated business planning is being supported. With this, you have something in place that helps you to create accounts and to assign access in a very robust and fast way. But as mentioned earlier, creating accounts and assigning access fast and robust is not sufficient, because you also need to think about risks that might come from assigning access and maybe too much access to users. And that's something where you then need to look into compliance and governance solutions that make sure that if there are any risks that come from the assignment of access, these are picked up and these are then either mitigated or completely removed. And for that, we also have solutions in place from our GRC portfolio, so governance, risk, and compliance. And Gero will now talk you through them and explain a bit more what we really can offer there. Gero, over to you.
Thanks, Christian. And now let's have a look into the compliance aspect of identity lifecycle management and which enhancements have been done there in the last couple of months. In SAP Cloud Identity Access Governance, we concentrate on the aspect of TCO reduction for managing the workforce and their transition of roles and responsibilities in the company, as well as compliance aspects like fraud prevention, prevention of access proliferation, and guided processes for elevated access. Due to increased digitalization and remote work, it is more important than ever before that a company is able to support their workforce to work wherever and whenever they need it, without compromising on security and compliance. Nowadays, reality is too that the business IT landscapes get more and more hybrid and making extensive use of cloud deployments of business software as part of the corporate infrastructure. So you need a solution that can manage both worlds, growing and adapting to the corporate needs and dynamics in the business. In SAP Cloud Identity Access Governance, we have a comprehensive set of business functionalities and processes to manage the user and authorization part of intelligent enterprise scenarios in S/4HANA and other cloud applications. With access analysis, we analyze cross-system all authorizations and entitlements of a user, identifying potential segregation of duty conflicts and critical authorizations in order to have an option to mitigate those risks, refine the assignments of roles and groups, or implement mitigation controls themselves. In business role management, we drastically simplify the handling of roles and groups for business users by creating cross-system business roles that follow its own governance lifecycle, considering risk-free role creation, a staged release process, and automated reconciliations. Access request management enables companies to have one central entry point to request, approve, or reject user access to all connected systems in the landscape, including integrated compliance and segregation of duty checks. One-time compliance is not a sustainable approach, as companies must ensure regular reviews of access for their users to follow the need-to-know principle. For that, access certifications provide a structured, workflow-driven process to enable periodic reviews of user access. And finally, privileged access management provides procedures to grant and monitor elevated access of emergency users to business systems in times of critical needs, with an integrated review cycle for all activities performed. With that functionality, we are in the center of the end-to-end identity lifecycle for intelligent enterprise scenarios for employees and other workforce, managing every step of onboarding, promotions, job changes, and offboarding with secure and compliant roles and system assignments in applications like Ariba, SuccessFactors, Fieldglass, SAP Analytics Cloud, and of course, S/4HANA. But let us focus now on the functional enhancements on a more technical level that are now available for your consumption. First of all, we have worked hard to give you more choice connecting SAP Cloud Identity Access Governance to other systems. We have enabled APIs to provision access requests to third-party systems via the well-known SCIM interface that is supported by many external systems, as it is a standard in the cloud world. Furthermore, it is now also possible to use an API to create access requests in SAP Cloud Identity Access Governance, which is great news for integrating SAP Cloud Identity Access Governance with other identity management solutions. At the heart of all compliance activities is an up-to-date cross-system segregation of duties rule set. And this is now including additional rules for our cloud solution, such as Ariba, Fieldglass, and integrated business planning. Finally, we also made significant progress by enabling SAP Cloud Identity Access Governance to act as a tool of choice for managing privileged access to S/4HANA. I will explain this feature further down in the presentation. An additional enhancement we made is in the area of access analysis. Once users have a changed access in the connected system landscape, SAP Cloud Identity Access Governance will automatically notify compliance responsibles to recheck the segregation of duty state of their employees, thus acting in a preventive manner, detecting potential security violations early. Let us also focus a bit on the overall process of bringing additional systems into the game that don't necessarily have to come from SAP, as many companies do already have an existing identity management solution in place. We have extended the starting and ending point of that process so that interfaces exist now to trigger an access request workflow with integrated SOD checks from a third-party tool, or, as in the case of the Intelligent Enterprise, from HR events of, for example, SuccessFactors. And after passing the flexible workflow approval process with integrated business checks, we can then provision to non-SAP systems via the SCIM adapter too. As our last topic for today, I want to draw your attention to our new functionality for privileged access management for S/4HANA, which is a complete functional package around the process of organizing, granting, and finally monitoring elevated access to business systems to stay ahead of compliance challenges in this critical period. To show you some impression of how the solution works, we have prepared a small demo video for you that highlights some aspects of it. So basically, let's now have a look at the demo video.
SAP Cloud IAG Privileged Access Management gives you a compliant and structured process to request elevated access to business functionality. You can maintain those privileged users with their master data and allowed activities, see the approval steps to grant this access to emergency users, including their task list and historical risk evaluation information. While the emergency user is active in the S/4HANA system, SAP collects all actions and data modifications in the system logs. Finally, We have a built-in review process where log evaluations with machine learning support allow you to monitor and check every single step the emergency user has performed in the S/4HANA system, with the option to approve the activity or request additional information.
That leads us to the summary of our presentation. Let us recap. SAP Cloud Identity Access Governance is a central tool in the intelligent enterprise scenario for managing compliance aspects of identity lifecycle and gives you the tools and functions of governing a guided process around access requests, business role management, and privileged access on top of the cloud identity services. It also focuses on the integration aspects across different products like SuccessFactors, SAP Analytics Cloud, and S/4HANA Cloud to provide a seamless onboarding experience. And finally, we also have extended SAP Cloud Identity Access Governance capabilities to integrate to non-SAP systems via additional APIs. With that, back to you, Christian, for the second part of the summary.
Thank you, Gero. What you also saw today was SAP Cloud Identity Services, which includes the Identity Authentication Service. And you learned that Identity Authentication Service offers now also web authentication as an option for two-factor authentication, together with the many other options that you have for authenticating with or without two factors from this product. You also saw that Identity Authentication Service supports a number of industry standards, web authentication being one, but also SAML, OpenID Connect, and so on. On the other hand side, you saw Identity Provisioning Service, our solution for synchronizing accounts and access in the landscape, where you learned about the bulk mode, which now makes it much faster to provision a very large number of users and access assignments to a business application. And you saw that all of these services also support the integration with an existing identity and access management solution so that you can reuse whatever you have and use our services for the seamless integration of the SAP business applications. With that, I would like to draw your attention to options for further learning. So please take a look at what TechEd has to offer to you here. It's definitely worthwhile. And with that, we are done from our side. Thank you very much for joining. Have a great day and enjoy the rest of TechEd.
Also from my side, thank you for joining the session and enjoy the rest of TechEd.